Andrew Wan. Andrew, good to see you. Thank you for being here. It's been a long time. I think we saw one another at Larry Zarkoff's a couple of years ago. And Les, good to see you too. Hi. I'm gonna wait for a couple of other people to show up before we get going. This is the first time I've done one of these completely by myself. I usually have a guest or somebody to pop in and help me entertain people. It's just the three of us. In another minute, I'll get going. Can you all hear me? If you give me some feedback about my levels and whether I'm speaking loudly enough, it would be useful, especially this early in this thing. So is that a good level? Am I coming across? Alex, good to see you, Alex. All these people that Mike, bless you. Oh my gosh, it's like all my friends. That's incredible. Usually it's all kinds of people from out there in Bookland. So good to see you, Matt. Good to see you. And we'll get going here in a minute. Okay. Mike says it sounds great. Well, that's very good. I don't have to start projecting like I'm in the theater or something like that. But I hope you guys are, not being too inconvenienced by the coronavirus and things of that sort. I'm sequestering myself briefly in my house because I had a too close run-in with a guy a few days ago, and not that it was somebody that I was particularly worried about, but I have just been being very careful. So Les says, opening question, you had a screenplay for Off the Mangrove Coast. If you bring it out of your drawer, will you update it or film it retro? I love Off the Mangrove Coast. It's a terrific story. That screenplay is unfinished. I do not actually think that I will finish it. I'm very likely to turn it into a Beau L'Amour novel because it is such a jewel. Dad, about 5 times in his career, he wrote this story he experimented with a type of story about a bunch of kind of nefarious characters that get together to go after a treasure of some sort. And of course the situation is that the person who survives the adventure is the person who will actually get the treasure. And he did it a couple of times with treasures that were sort of on the large side, and it didn't really work very well. The great thing about Off the Mangrove Coast was the treasure that these guys are diving for is not very big, and so it's almost like to get any usefulness out of it at all, a few people can't survive the situation. So it kind of pits everyone against everyone. And no, I do not think I would update it because the whole vintage diving, the whole hard hat and diving dress kind of thing is just really cool. I just love that whole vibe. And of course, those divers really had to rely on one another, which makes the situation all that much more tense. Ronabeer, good to see you after all these years. It's been quite a while. It's so wonderful that you're here. And my sister, hi. Glad you're here. And Sandra May, fantastic. This is like all my buddies. Um, so that's terrific. Hi, Hal. Hal Hall wrote the definitive bibliography of Louis L'Amour, and really did a wonderful job rounding up every place that Dad was published. Well, if some fans don't show up, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I had all this stuff set up for people that barely knew me, and here it is, like old home week. So I guess I will just get started. If anybody's got any questions, and at this point, since we're all kind of friends, if they're personal questions, I'm up for that. I'm up for that also. In fact, it might even be a good time to ask those, because we don't have too many strangers in the group yet. So if there's anything going on, Sandra, we're fine out here. You know, things are a little tough, but we're being very careful. So if there's anything, Les says, have a fan who is struggling to find you. He won't be far away now. Okay, well, hopefully he'll tune in soon, and I can get going with the more fan-oriented part of it. Louis L'Amour says, I'm not sure you are broadcasting on the Louis L'Amour page. Holy mackerel, did I go out on my personal page? I don't think that's the case. I am going to, Paul, am I in the right? No, Kevin Koski is here. We're in the right place. Okay, that's good. Sandra says, I'd love to see you produce a movie. Well, the day may come, but it'll probably be a while. Lord knows we're not going to be producing too many movies until we get this disease over with. But I'm now kind of. Kathy says, we're watching over here in the hills. Catherine, Cameron, and Emily and Blue. Oh, okay. So I get it. I see where you're coming from. Hi, Catherine. So yeah, I'm sorry I'm treading water, but I'm hoping that some of the fans besides Kevin show up, and like I said, it's just great to be hearing from all of my buddies out there. Okay. Well, if this is it, what should we Reed joined? So hi, Reed. Haven't seen you in a long time. All of this is good, but still, all these people that I know, and I wasn't really set up for a whole bunch of people that I know. Daphne, another blast from the past. Oh my gosh. Okay, so Cameron is excited to see some movies. I logged in as your mom. No, that's great. We in California are locked down to a certain extent, and I think we're all kind of waiting to see what happens, but it's been difficult because the weather's been sort of beautiful, and we've kind of all been inside or just walking around our neighborhoods and taking it easy. I, of course, am very lucky because I can work from home, and a number of the people that I deal with can too, so that's all good. Fantastic. David says, how many Lost Treasures editions are coming out this year? I have no idea. Generally, we try and do about 6, and I kind of write them and set them up and send them off to the publisher, and then the publisher just deals with it, and I'm usually a couple of years of production. That doesn't take much when it's just 6 Lost Treasures editions. I'm usually a couple of years ahead, so it's hard for me to It's hard for me to tell. And if you go on the Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures website, the central column of the website, if you go down there and click on it, it'll take you to a thing that will show you what the, and so you can find the new Lost Treasures titles that way. I've been reading Louis L'Amour since I was 8 or 9, 57 now, my favorite writer. Right on. And Hal's back, and Kathy's watching, and let's see if we got any more questions here as I just scan down. Thought of using some excerpts from stories along with photos and artwork. How can I go about doing that? Contact the publisher. That would be Random House, Bantam, the Bantam Books imprint at Random House, and they can help you out with that. Very good. Okay, Tim and Russell and Brooke, fantastic. And so, don't know what you mean by now that's a lie. He's been gone a long time now. I definitely know that. He was my father. Paul is saying there are 6 set up for this year. Yeah, we generally have 6 Lost Treasures postscripts. My son and I have read all of the original books published. I've read a few more recent. Okay, he just likes them. That's terrific. Nita, that's wonderful that you are such a great fan. I'm really glad to hear that you are out there along with a number of other people. It's wonderful to hear from you. And so, let's see here. The Sacketts, more Sacketts, please. Well, I won't be writing any Sackett books as my dad. I only will take on something of his under really specific circumstances, and but I will be doing some Sackett Lost Treasures postscripts, and so those are to come. I'm actually planning on writing those while we are locked down. Janet says my absolute favorite is Haunted Mesa. That's wonderful, and we have a Haunted Mesa postscript that goes into all kinds of interesting things about that story. So the new edition of Haunted Mesa has got a Lost Treasures postscript. And so, Paul's writing in saying he's probably talking about me. So Paul from Louis L'Amour Central is writing in as Louis L'Amour, and so yes. He's not Louis L'Amour. He's just the guy who's running things at the headquarters. And so let's see if there's any other questions here before I. What are the chances of other Sackett books coming out? So yeah, I'm not going to write any Sackett books as my dad. He didn't leave anything unfinished, and I don't really care for the sort of situation that turns up when somebody's saying, oh, somebody's creating these and it's not the real Louis and things like that. So I don't like doing that. I do feel that works of Dad's where there's enough information so that I know what Dad's intentions were, I do feel good about going ahead and finishing those, but I don't like just making it from just out of nowhere. I feel like a Louis L'Amour book should be something that Louis L'Amour started and intended. And oh yeah, no problem. Somebody's saying didn't know you're his son. Yeah, that's okay. We're all just making this up as we go along. And any chance you'll do another graphic novel? I would love to do another graphic novel. In fact, I have half of a graphic novel to Last of the Breed, the script of it finished. I have to find a publisher, and so that's a whole process. And graphic novels are very expensive to produce, and they take a long time. And so, yes, I would love to, and I keep trying. So we'll see what happens. And let's see if there's any other here. Will there be a Lost Treasures Volume 3? No, I don't think there will be. At one time, I had sort of thought about doing one that had Dad's nonfiction writing in it, but there isn't really enough of it, and and to make it enough, it would be packed with all kinds of strange things. And I think it's probably better to deal with most of those strange things in the form of a biography. So that the same information will be coming, but in a different form. And so David says, I'm glad you're not ghostwriting anything. Well, I kind of am, but like I said, I won't create a story and say that it was Louis's out of nowhere, not out of my own creativity. I will finish something of his, and I would, I would take an idea that he had and develop it and things like that. But no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do something from a club. Tom says, what time period was Last of the Breed set in? Well, Last of the Breed was set in the 1980s, at the end of the Cold War. But Dad was inspired. The inspiration for Last of the Breed almost completely came from the Gary Powers incident, where a U-2 pilot named Gary Powers was shot down over Russia in 1960, I believe. And in fact, when I've been working on the graphic novel, one of the things I've been planning on doing is setting the graphic novel in around 1960, because it would allow Joe Mack, the protagonist of that story, who is part Native American, it would allow him to actually have known a grandfather that was, like at the Little Bighorn or Wounded Knee or something like that. Whereas if the character grew up in or if he was shot down in the 1980s, in the late 1980s when the story was written, it would be difficult. That would be a guy who's roughly my age, and I'm not old enough to have. Actually, the weird thing is I am kind of old enough to have a grandfather from that era, because my grandfather was born in 1868, if you can believe it. So my grandfather was born in 1868. My father was born in 1908. I was born in 1961. But I think setting it a little earlier would make it more fun, interesting looking. And so here, have you considered approaching Netflix about making more Louis L'Amour movies? Yeah, it could happen at some point. I've been holding off with some of these things because the typical kind of ethos of movies has been a little more progressive these days, and I don't think that Westerns are necessarily the kind of thing that they want to make. But the time will come. I mean, I keep hoping. And someone says, I'm so inspired by his work, I'm writing my own book. Fantastic. You need to do that. Everybody should take this opportunity if we have to be shut down like we are here in California. Are there any more movies? There's nothing in production at the moment, and you never, ever, ever, ever believe in anything in Hollywood until somebody actually starts spending the money. So nobody's spending any money right now. So wait on that one. So Tim says, back in the 1990s, the Margaret Mitchell estate had put out a sequel to Gone with the Wind. Will you eventually do the same with your father's works? No, there's no reason for us to do that. The only reason that I would finish a story that Louis started is because I feel particularly inspired by it, or I feel that it was something that just really needed to be done. No Traveler Returns, which was Dad's first novel, which I finished a couple of years ago. It really needed to be out there and be finished because it was Dad's first novel. And when I finally kind of figured out what it was all about and how to approach it and how to wrap it up, that was very exciting to me. And it was just something that needed to be done because it was his first novel. And there may be some other things like that. Any more? We kind of covered that. No, not really. I loved Law of the Desert Born. Fantastic. Thank you. We hope to do another graphic novel. Everything. That's great. I'm just skimming, asking for things that are questions. And someone says, would love to be able to watch Down the Long Hills. You can occasionally you could find it on video cassette. I'm not sure what happened to all those old Disney movies, but it's out there. Somebody will someday resurrect it. I mean, maybe if Hollywood is shut down because of coronavirus for a while, the streaming services will start pulling more and more older movies and putting them up because they don't have enough. They don't have enough new material. Who knows what'll happen? Do you think your dad would have approved a movie script based on Riley's Luck? Well, Dad didn't necessarily approve. He sold properties to the movies to make money, and he didn't really care that much about about how they were made. I mean, he really wanted them to be made well, but his attitude was always, if you sell a house, you can't tell the new owner how to decorate it. And so his feeling was always that the story was sold, he'd done his version. I personally think that a movie of Riley's Luck would be fantastic. And at one time, I was very briefly involved in preparing to turn it into a miniseries. In fact, if you go to the Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures website and poke around I think it's over in the Pieces of Louis' Mind section or something like that, you can find there's an area where there are extra. Paul can post this, can post its location as we're talking here, but there is a exploration of Riley's Luck. So what I did was I broke the novel down. I just wrote a brief treatment of the novel, and then I broke it into a few sections. And then after each section, I commented on things that might be interesting for a movie adaptation. And just doing that, just kind of lifting the hood and discovering what was there, was really fascinating. Things that I hadn't really expected. It's really a story about men's relationships with women. It has to be. The first scene, a guy's mother is telling someone to take the kid and leave him out in the storm and let him die. So it has to be about, relationships between men and women and mothers and sons and absent fathers and sons and things like that. And there was just all kinds of fascinating things as I started exploring it that I discovered, and I wrote them up, and they're on that website in note form. So you could find that. Janet says, what inspired Haunted Mesa as it's so different from the others? Well, Dad always wanted to write science fiction, but he always felt like he was so grounded in reality and the real world and things like that, and yet he was also very interested in the paranormal and things of that sort. And he had had some kind of strange experiences in the Southwest, some kind of spooky experiences, and he was just inspired by that. If you were to buy the new edition, the Lost Treasures edition, in a much more organized fashion than I can do here, I can, if you read it, it will take you through where that story came from and how it developed, and I include several different takes on how Louis might have written it at different times in there. So there's almost like there's different versions, or at least there's indications of different versions of how that story might have evolved in different eras, and then of course it finally did so. So it's it's one of my favorite stories to have a little bit to do with it if we as we go along here. Going on down, how many of your dad's books were made into movies? I have lost count, but again, it's on our website. If you go to the movies section at louislamour.com, there is a there is a chronological, there's not just here's the movies you can buy, but if you search through that section, you'll find a place where there's a list of all the movies. Dad actually probably sold more individual titles to television than to feature films. And so he started in early television writing Cowboy G-Men, which was a very, very early, 1951, 52, 53 television series. And he wrote several episodes of that. He wrote a whole bunch of episodes of Tales of Wells Fargo. He wrote an episode of Maverick. He wrote an episode of Sugarfoot. He wrote an episode of The Texan, or a couple of episodes of The Texan, and a whole bunch of others. And so if you go there, you can poke through that. So Dad had probably as close a relationship with television as he did with the movies. And so going on down, Sandra says, was Louis close to writing about Oak Island? Well, kind of. Oak Island almost made an appearance in the Talon series, in the early Talon stories. And if you were to look in Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, Volume 2, I believe the first section or the first chapter of Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, Volume 2, deals with the Talon story that might have touched on Oak Island. There's only a brief mention of it, but as you read it, you'll kind of see that he might have even been experimenting with the idea of the original Talon character being the person who created the Oak Island money pit. So that's a possibility. Let's see what questions there are here. It's difficult. I'm having a hard keeping all these great comments and everything. So I'm just focusing on questions. And if I miss any, you can certainly catch up with me and send me an email, or I'll look back through this afterwards and try and answer anything I can. Someone says, just caught the end of the Riley's Luck thing. No one's planning on doing a movie of it at the moment, but I did prepare some information, which you can find on the Lost Treasures website. And let's see here. Going on down. Okay, I seem to have caught up. And so I'm going to show you all, if I can, we're going to have to see how well the video holds up. But I've had a whole bunch of photographs that I was going to have. I'm reaching over to pick one up, and it's kind of stuck to the table. I'm going to show you some photographs that I was going to have framed for my house, and I didn't quite have enough money right away to have them framed. So I'll just run you through some family photos and trinkets and things of that sort. So this is my dad. I'm trying to get it situated correctly. There we go. In Central Park in New York City, probably in the mid-1950s. So that's kind of a cool photograph. This was when he was spending a good deal of time in New York City, and had occasionally been throwing around the idea of writing for the theater. And not too long after that photograph was taken out in California, he met my mother. And so here's an old picture of my mom. Again, I'm having trouble orienting them with the camera, but that's an old picture of my mom. And I'm not sure if this is in the desert near Palm Springs, where her family owned some property, or if it's in Arizona. But that was my mom, not too long after my dad met her. And here's a photo of them at their wedding, with this giant cake, which is pretty cute. And then let's see what else we have. This is my mom and dad at the command performance, the Royal Command Performance of Shalako. And again, I'm not very good at this because everything is backwards from my perspective. And so they're at the British premiere of the movie Shallow Cup. These are printed on aluminum, which is very cool, but it also makes them kind of, when I lay them on my desk, they kind of vacuum seal themselves to the desktop. Here's another picture of my mother, and this is on the trip that she and Dad took around New Mexico, where they first went to Mora, which was the home of the Sacketts. It's where Tyrell and Orrin Sackett settled in the early days. And so this probably isn't too long one way or the other from the day they pulled into Mora, New Mexico. And this is in our house we had just purchased in West Hollywood. It's my mom on Christmas. I think I was probably 1 year old when this was taken. And we'll see a few more kind of these fun things. This is Los Angeles had Louis L'Amour Day, and so this is the mayor, Tom Bradley, and my mom and dad. And I had, I grew up with Tom Bradley as the mayor, but I had never known he was such a giant guy. And so he was a really big dude, as you can see. And let's see what else we have. This is just to give you an idea of, I'm not going to show you many baby pictures, but this is me at a very young age. It's probably near Christmas time, and I have just received this tricycle, and I am dressed to match it, which is an ever so early 60s thing to have done. This is my dad bench pressing my sister. Dad used to work out every afternoon, and so he was obviously both sweaty and using my sister as his barbell. Here we are again in our West Hollywood. Oops, there we go. In our West Hollywood house, my sister and my mother and my dad making scary moves behind them. We started going to Durango, Colorado, because I, as a young kid, was enamored with steam trains. And so this probably isn't the first year we went, but this is me having a lot of fun on the Durango to Silverton Railroad. And then, let's see what else we've got here. This is Dad with John and Magda McHale. And these people were unbelievably influential in the post-World War II art world. John McHale was the creator of the concept of pop art and using kind of found objects in art and things like that. And then he kind of graduated from doing those sort of things to creating this institute that sort of studied the future and various things that would happen in the future. He was a fascinating guy, and she was a fascinating lady. They were both super intelligent and really, really good friends of ours, and really wonderful, interesting people. And actually, when I was a kid and I knew them, I actually never knew how influential and cool they were. And then here's just after we moved to West LA, to our house after the house in West Hollywood. This is my dad working at his makeshift desk before we actually built a room that would be his study. So he's kind of working in a room that's right off the hallway in the main part of the house. And that was where he worked for several years until we actually got a really good office built for him. I'm going to take a break from the photos now. I'm going to scan down and see if there's any more pictures. Um, or any more questions? Yeah, I can't even talk right. Uh, oh, Daphne's back. Fantastic. Hi, Daphne. Sorry for all that confusion earlier. Um, did Louis enjoy writing cowboy detectives like Beaudry and Borden Chantry? Yeah, he liked it. I think he liked it as much as he liked writing all kinds of stuff. Um, he had the Beaudry stories were gave him a fair sort of success in the pulp magazines, and people still really love them. So obviously that's a good that's a good thing. And got some other New Zealanders there. Hey, fantastic! Love your country. Wish I could go back. Hope to soon. All right, so now I've got some fun trinkets from the past of my dad's. Dad was when Dad first was drafted in World War II. The unit that he was in was an armored unit, tank destroyers, and the tank destroyers had this patch. So this is one of his tank destroyer patches. They wore this on their uniforms. They had these very fancy uniforms. They had I don't know, whoever their kind of sponsor in the military, I can't remember if it was a general or something like that, had a lot of clout, and he actually got all kinds of cool things for the tank destroyers in the days when they thought that was going to be something that mattered. Ultimately, their equipment was a little bit obsolete, and they ended up not performing the tank destroyer role quite as much as they expected to. And after training and going through officers candidate school with the intention of being in a tank destroyer unit, the Army suddenly realized that Dad was too old and they couldn't put him in a frontline unit. They had a cutoff. I think it was 34. And they didn't put guys over 34 into, kind of frontline combat units unless they had already been in that unit. So if you were already an officer in one of those units and you were kind of already over there, they didn't care if you were 34 or not, but they weren't putting guys in back in the States. And so he had to shift over and join the Transportation Corps. And so the Transportation Corps had these pins that they wore. I don't know if you can see the little symbol. I'll try and describe it. It's kind of like it's like a ship's wheel and like a wheel, like a truck wheel with wings on it. And there you can see it a little bit better. And so that was one of his Transportation Corps pins. And then Dad made expert with these various weapons: rifle, machine gun, another rifle, and submachine gun, and bayonet. And I think there might have been another which has gone missing. But anyway, he made expert with those various weapons. He had 4 bronze stars, as you can see there, from World War II. And then that's it for that isn't it for the World War II stuff. I have a little bit more, but his grandfather, I believe, had joined this fraternal organization called the Grand Army of the Republic, and this was a medal that they kind of gave everybody in the fraternal organization. They were all veterans of the Civil War, and so this was his mother's father had that. So that's a little thing from inside my curio box. And then this is really fun. This is something that Bantam did years ago. And it said, "I read Louis when Louis wasn't cool." And that's just a little promotional button that they had. I wish we had some of them to hand out, but we don't. Let's see if I have one more kind of World War II thing here. This is a actually beautiful set of Henselt and Wetzlar binoculars. Really, really beautifully made. They're German. And my dad took them from a German officer who, his job in the Transportation Corps was moving gasoline tankers around France and Holland and Belgium and Germany. And they had pulled into an airfield, and I guess they were waiting for American planes to come in that they were going to refuel, when they saw this German aircraft circling the field. And they sort of sat over in the shade of some trees and sort of watched this happen. And the plane landed, and there may have been more than one person in the plane, but a German officer leapt out of the aircraft and sprinted for the office, or the control area of this abandoned airbase. And after a while, my dad sort of went and followed him in, and discovered, I guess he'd had to use the restroom. And so Dad found him on the john and arrested him and took his Henselt and Wetzlar binoculars, which were Dad's binoculars. Those were the binoculars that he used for the next 40 years. And they're excellent, and I still use them myself. But anyway, kind of amusing, sort of embarrassing if you're that German officer story. I'm going to look down and see if there's more. Anne Wright, fantastic, good to see you. Some more questions here. Who's my personal favorite of my dad's? I don't know. I like Macon Fallon a lot, but I like the story of Fallon a lot because it's just got it's just written with such a sense of humor. So I've always liked that. And of course, like everybody, I'm a great Tell Sackett fan. And let's see. After you and your sister were born, were any of his characters based off of you? I don't know, not really. Maybe the characters in Down the Long Hills, maybe, I don't know. Dad, as his career went on, he didn't really base his characters on real people very often. I think this is true with a lot of writers. I think when writers are younger, they kind of use real characters, real people as models for their characters, and then as they keep going, they start realizing that the requirements of the story kind of suggest that a character should be like this or should be like that, and so the story dictates the characters more than anything else. So not really. Let's see. I've read all of his. This is Chad saying, I've read all of the books that I know about. The list from the first pages of the books. Are there any that are not listed? Well, you should look on the website because it would depend on the era of book that you're looking at. If you're looking at a book that was just freshly reprinted in the last couple of years, then the books that are in the front of that book are absolutely correct. There are no others. But obviously, if you picked up a book, an older book, a book from 20 or 30 years ago, it wouldn't have all the things in it that we've published since then. So you need to look carefully. Hal Hall says, I recall mentions that your dad read several diaries of pioneers crossing the country. Do you have those, or was he just able to read them? We have some of them, and some of them are published. It isn't like he was only reading, personal journals that were, crumbling pages and things like that. Some of them are actually relatively well-known books. And then let's see here. How old when he started writing? So Leah wants to know how old Dad was when he started writing. Well, he started he started publishing. The first thing he had published was in, I think, 1933, if I've got it correctly, and so he would have been in his 20s, but he probably, he started writing before that. He was experimenting with writing before that. So I'm not entirely sure how I would, how I would express that. And then let's see. We've collected all of the books and almost all of the audiobooks. Love Son of a Wanted Man. Thank you, Nancy. I love Son of a Wanted Man too. It was one of my favorite projects. It was such a blast to work on. Was Echo Sackett the only female character themed book written by your dad? If you're talking about a novel, I would say yes. If you're talking sort of like the whole book has to be kind of from a female point of view, I would say yes. There are definitely other books that have extremely significant female characters, and as someone here mentions, M. Sackett was one of those, or M. Talon was one of those characters, and there were a few others. The character in Untitled Chapter would be one of those characters, but there were also, Dad wrote a number of short stories that were about women from women's point of view, and so Beyond the Great Snow Mountains would be one of those, which is an adventure story that's set in China, and it's about a woman who has been abandoned in central China for years and years during World War II, and she finally gets an opportunity to get out, and she has a son who is half Chinese, and she's just she's trying to figure out whether or not she can take him back to the United States, and what her life and his life will be like if she does. It's a very wonderful, kind of powerful story. And another one is By the Waters of San Tadeo, which is a story that has a very feral woman character in it who's very intense, and it's all about her. David says, I know he published one book of poetry. Did he leave any poems behind? And so, yes, he did. We republished the book of poetry in the 1990s, and we included more of Dad's poems in it. So the new version of Smoke from This Altar has almost twice as much stuff in it. And on here, where did he find the name Chick Beaudry? I have got no idea. I wish I knew. Let's see what else we have. Okay, so then I'm going to show you some more stuff. I've got some more photos here, as long as we're all here together. This is a photo of, I need to get it up and situate it correctly, which is, again, it's all backwards, so it's hard. The guy who's kind of in the middle here, oops, let's see if I can do this. That guy is my father's brother, Parker. This was the North Dakota National Guard just before they went to France during World War I. And so there's a bit of family history. And then I'm going to take you through a little bit of a tour of the other side of the family. So my grandmother on my mom's side, so my mother's mother, was acted in silent movies out here in Hollywood. And here's a photograph of her. And then I'll show you another photograph of her. This was shot in her near her home in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Before, I'm not sure if this was before she went out to Hollywood or after she came home to finish school. But she made a number of silent films, and then this is my mother and her elder brother and her dad, and they are down in the La Quinta area, which is near Palm Springs. And so my grandfather, this gentleman here, was a land developer in the Coachella Valley, and so that's them on their kind of farm. They had a citrus and date farm down there. So I'm building up to kind of an amusing photograph of my grandmother. So here's my grandmother a little bit later in life, and she lived in Hawaii for a while. And so this is her welcoming someone, maybe the rest of the family, to Hawaii. This is in the 50s. And then I love this photograph. This is just such an incredible photograph. So my grandmother in Hawaii tapping her cigarette out into a volcano, which is just crazy. So anyway, she's tapping the ash on her cigarette into a volcano. Have a couple of other photographs. Now we're kind of getting into stuff that has to do with me. This is me and Greg Manches, who's the artist who has painted an awful lot of our covers. And this is Greg and I in Colorado. And Greg did a Facebook Live with me back in, I guess it was November, and where we talked a lot about doing covers and all of the details of doing various Louis L'Amour covers that, if you're into that kind of thing, you would probably find sort of interesting. One of the things I did before I started working in publishing was I worked in the movie business, and this is a photograph of me as a sound recordist, location sound mixer, working on a little horror film. And let's see what else I've got here. We were talking about Haunted Mesa earlier. So one of the first things that I did for my dad was a good deal of the on-site research into the locations of Haunted Mesa. And so this is me and my buddy David Lux, and we have taken that boat up the San Juan River, up Lake Powell onto the San Juan River, and that is No Man's Mesa in the background. And we are at the bottom of Castle Canyon, which leads up to Johnny's Hole. And we're about to go we're about to try to get into Johnny's Hole, which we weren't able to do because it was just too tough a climb, and we didn't have enough time. But it was an incredible trip up the lake on that boat. We had to pack a bunch of extra gas and all kinds of stuff to get there. So that's me in kind of an adventuring mode. And then here's a photograph we were recording. Whoops. We were recording sound effects for the Diamond of Jeru. This is a really weird, that's me, but that is a really interesting microphone that will record, if you wear headphones and listen to what the microphone records, it actually sounds, you can actually record 360 degrees, and you can kind of tell when something's behind you, and it's an interesting effect. We don't use it a lot, but it's called a dummy head, and so that's me and the dummy head microphone. It has little like fake ears, like ears that are made out of rubber, and it has microphones in the bottom of the ear, and I guess this shape to your ear is one of the things that allows you to tell what direction the sounds are coming from. And so anyway, you can, if you record with this, you can kind of, and you wear headphones, when you listen to it, you can kind of tell where the sounds are coming from. And then one more, also doing sound effects for the Diamond of Jeru. This is me reclining on the cannon to this. It's not a tank, it's a motorized howitzer, but we had to record a tank. We couldn't find a tank. This was as close as we got to it. So there I am, laying on the gun of that thing while we were doing sound effects for the Diamond of Jeru. So I'm going to see if there's any more questions. Let's see here. Okay, well, there we go. Looks like there's still a few people around here. Was the western town ever completed in the Four Corners area? No, it was not. Um, that project got started in the mid to late 60s. There was a fair amount of planning done. If you were to go to the Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures website and poke around and find the section that has the photographs, hopefully Paul can zip in here and give you a link to where that is. There's actually some artists' renderings of what it might have looked like. And he can at least get you started on that page so that you can skim through the photos on that page and see what the town might have looked like if it had been made. They never really had enough money to do it, and the people who were involved got kind of involved in the movie business, and they were sort of tangentially involved in some of the Ewan Lloyd movies, Shalco, Catlow, and Man Called Noon. They were sort of tangentially involved in the Sackett's movie miniseries, and they I'm not sure that they ever really concentrated on the Western town development enough, and maybe realized how incredibly expensive a situation like that is. And so by the late 70s, it was kind of over. I mean, we hadn't given up on it completely, and we never had any money involved in it. I think my dad might have given them $2,000 or $3,000 or something like that. And you know, he was supposed to be involved with the project, and they were very polite to us, and they were really nice. They were really nice people. But eventually it just wasn't going to come together. And so it's too bad, but I don't know. I'm not sure that having a great big development like that was something that we really needed to have. And let's see. Were there any notes or ideas for future Kerber stories? Yes. If you were to go and buy the Lost Treasures edition of The Walking Drum, and again, it's one of those things where I'm ahead of the Lost Treasures publishing process by so much. I cannot remember if The Walking Drum has been published in a Lost Treasures edition yet, but I have definitely done the Lost Treasures edition, and it has, I was able to pull together a pretty good outline of what the second book in the Kerber trilogy would have been like. And I put that together from various sources. And it's in that postscript. There's really no indication of what the third book would have been like. I don't think Dad had any idea what the third book would have been like, except for maybe in its most vague outline. But there's a pretty detailed vision of what book 2 would have been like in there, and so I think you could pretty much feel like you knew what that was going to be like. And then Mark asks, are you ever? I know this is a little bit repetitive, but people keep wanting to know, so I'm just going to keep answering these questions. Are you ever going to expand on some of the books your dad wrote? Yeah, there will be some more. Hopefully, if the publisher supports it, and there will definitely be a few more, and so we'll see how that goes. It's been an hour, and I don't want to buddy, but as long as the questions keep coming, I will try and answer them. Ken says you should do Kerber. Yeah, if I knew what book 3 was going to be, I would be more inclined to say yes. I would. Dad always talked about the Kerber stories being a trilogy, and if I had a sense of what to do for the third one, I would be more inclined to do it. I don't really want to, Dad did the first one, and people are saying, oh no, but I want more. I want all of them. And then if I did the second one, people would still be saying, but I want all of them. And as I've said, I'm quite comfortable executing a plan that he left behind, but what I try not to do is make up something of my own and then try to pass it off as Louis'. And so I don't really like doing that. Do you continue to have a relationship? Matthew is asking, do you continue to have a relationship with Bantam? It's kind of strange, but there was Bantam Books, and then a German company called Bertelsmann, which is a big multinational publishing company, media company actually. They do all kinds of stuff. Bought Bantam, and then Bantam acquired Doubleday, Dell, and Delacorte, with Bertelsmann being the owner of all of those. And then after a while, they went out and they purchased Random House. But because Random House was the very well-known, kind of more prestigious name in the publishing business, they started using Random House as the name for the whole operation. And so Bantam still exists, kind of buried in the, under the umbrella of Random House. And there are still some Bantam employees who we've known for ages and ages who work there, and we love working with them, and it's wonderful that still exists. So yeah, Bantam is still a thing, and it's become, even though it actually owns Random House, the whole operation is now called Random House. Looking down here, someone else is asking about doing another graphic novel. Yes, may very well do another graphic novel. I love doing those. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to tell stories in pictures, especially for somebody who is originally a filmmaker, and it would be great. We'd love to do it. We just have to find a publisher. And so Shane says, what led you to turn Law of the Desert Born into a graphic novel over other novels? Well, I wanted to do something that I had a script on. So I had a couple of movie scripts. Son of a Wanted Man was one of them, and Law of the Desert Born was the other one. And I didn't want to go through the year-long trajectory of coming up with a script that was just for whatever we were going to do as a graphic novel. And so at the time, I was talking to some people about doing Son of a Wanted Man as a movie. And I said, we could do this as a graphic novel, and they were very nervous about that. They felt that somehow that would undercut their position as a film, where I kind of thought it would help. And they seemed uncomfortable with that, and so I went with the other one. I went with Law of the Desert Born, and I'm not sure which one would have been a better one. Son of a Wanted Man. The reason I had several movie properties that were set up, and Son of a Wanted Man was intended to be a very traditional Western. It's a lot like Red River, and it was supposed to be a very, very classic Western. I wanted to have a script ready to go that was a classic Western. I also wanted to have a script that was ready to go that was a really innovative kind of new version of a Western, kind of a more artistic, kind of indie movie kind of script. And that was Law of the Desert Born. And so the first one that we discussed to be a graphic novel was Son of a Wanted Man, the more traditional one. And then we switched over to Law of the Desert Born, and I think that was probably a really good choice, because the comic book business is it doesn't really like traditional westerns. I mean, I'm not sure that it liked even Law of the Desert Born, but Law of the Desert Born was more of the kind of thing that makes a good comic book. It was a little more innovative. It was a little more edgy, and so it became the project that we went forward with. And ultimately, it was just a load of fun. And everybody who worked on it, Charlie Santino, who adapted it, so he was in the sense of being like a movie. The guy who adapts it to the comic book form is sort of like the director and editor. And Thomas, who is the artist, who's kind of like the combination director of photography, but he's also every actor. He also kind of plays every part and puts the expression on everybody's face and does everything like that. He was marvelous to work with, and Paul, who runs our website and is helping me out with this live session right now, Paul did all of the post-production, so there were many, many things that we did in Photoshop and in the computer to make the book turn out really well. And I was just really, really extraordinarily happy with that project. It says, did your dad have a say in the actors who played the Sacketts? No. It is extremely rare that any novelist ever has very much influence on a motion picture. It almost never happens. Dad did have probably a little more influence on the Sacketts than maybe some other things in his career, in that he never made any comments or tried to impose his will on any movie ever. He knew that wasn't his place, and he knew that as a novelist, if you try to do that, they just are going to stop listening to you. However, what happened is occasionally they would ask him questions, and even the fact that they bothered to ask him questions was kind of good and interesting, and more of a relationship than you have with a lot of filmmakers. So they did ask him some questions about what he thought about the script, and he made some comments. That'll be in a postscript. That'll be in a Lost Treasures postscript one of these days. And so no, they didn't ask about the casting. You can't really, when you're casting a movie, you kind of have to take who's available, and you don't have the kind of choices that you think you'd have. You start talking about who's gonna be available to do a film, and you say, well, this guy's here, and if you don't make a choice, if you don't make a decision on that actor, like that week, you could lose him to another show. And so it all moves very quickly, and there's taking the time to kick it back up or back down the chain of command, or up the chain of command, or whatever it is to a novelist. Nobody's going to take the time to do that. The cast was terrific. The cast of that show was terrific. They did a great job of mixing old talent and new talent, and it was absolutely fantastic. But I can't say that my dad really had anything to do with it. Says, is your sister writing? Yes, she has definitely been writing, and you should check in with her Facebook and her social media stream. She's done some interesting stuff. And here, any movies in the works? A lot of people are asking if there are any movies in the works. No, there are not any movies in the works. Hopefully someday, we'll see, but not happening at the moment. Jacob says, what was your father's drink of choice and yours? Well, neither one of us drink like alcohol kind of drink. My dad would have a glass of wine occasionally. I never even drink wine. So I'd have to say my drink of choice is water. And every once in a while, I might treat myself to something like a Coca-Cola, which the last time I had one was really, really good. But yeah, neither one of us drink. My dad might have a beer or a glass of wine occasionally, but he didn't really care about it very much. David Williams says, is Guns of the Timberland going to be a Lost Treasures edition. Would love to hear more about his relationship with Alan Ladd. And I have been thinking about that, but I'm not really sure that I don't do a Lost Treasures edition unless I know I've got at least 6 pages of stuff that I can include. I never want to trick anybody into spending their money on a Lost Treasures edition, and I don't have enough material. So Alan's family was and is very close with my mother, and Alan bought Guns of the Timberlands from my dad to help my mom and dad when they first got married, to put some money into their pocket when they first got married. And that's really the wonderful thing. Alan was a really terrific man, and he did that great favor for my mom and dad, and that's kind of the story. So it's there isn't really enough there, at least so far, at least in the things that I've investigated so far, to bother doing a Lost Treasures postscript. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a very meaningful event in their lives. Did your dad have a favorite actor that played one of the roles from his books? I don't know. I think I doubt it. I mean, he really did stay arm's length from the movies, and I think he liked the idea that there were movies that were going to be made, but then he was not so. He just didn't get involved. He wasn't particularly happy or unhappy with how they turned out. The fact that they were done was good publicity for the books. All he cared about was the books, and so he just kind of moved on. BJ Randall says, were there any notes on what specifically transpired in the fight between Joe Mack and Alakon in Last of the Breed? No, I think Louis intentionally left that up to your imagination. And so one of the, just on that subject, because I think it's important, I think it's an interesting aspect. Dad's type of writing, the writing that was done by the men who wrote category fiction between the 1950s and the 1990s, let's say, or the early 2000s, a lot of them got started writing short stories. And they tended to write stories that were very brief, very economical. A lot of Dad's novels were between 140 and 250 pages, which is shorter by 100 pages than most novels are today. And they were, I think the wonderful thing about it is he left a lot up to your imagination. People would say, people will talk to me and they say, I love Louis' descriptions of this or that or the other thing. And actually, he didn't do a lot of describing of things. He was incredible at picking out 1 or 2 details that were just enough to get your imagination going. And then you, the reader, tell yourself the rest of the story or something like that. I mean, you, the reader, your imagination is doing half the work. And that's one of the reasons he and other writers of that era like him, who wrote those very economical stories, I think are so beloved, because it's a shared experience. It isn't the literary novelist downloading every single detail into your mind. It's a shared creative experience. And so I think there are certain things that he really wanted the audience to imagine on their own. And that fight was one of those things. So Matthew says, did your dad have an opinion on Western dramas like Bonanza, Big Valley, and Gunsmoke? No, not really. I mean, I think after a while he started feeling, as a lot of people did in the 1960s and early 70s, that the television landscape was getting oversaturated with Westerns. And he, in the late 50s and early 60s, he made an attempt to, I won't say stop writing westerns because he didn't want to do that, but to write fewer westerns, and he wanted to go off and write stories in other genres, and he was not very successful in doing that. That's the period when The Walking Drum was written. The Walking Drum was originally written in 1960, and he was not able to sell it for another 24 years or something of the sort. And because he wanted to do other things and he couldn't break into those other genres, he started trying to change how he wrote westerns. So he would write a western like The Broken Gun, which was a contemporary western mystery. It was kind of set in the early to mid 60s. Or he would do Riley's Luck, in which there's a lot of the action occurs in Europe and things of that sort. And so he tried to expand the western so that he could have a little more fun in what he did with it. And eventually he got to the point where he was doing things like The Californios and Haunted Mesa, where it was a little bit of science fiction and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And he definitely mixed it up to the point, and he was writing the early Sackett stories, which took place on the earliest frontier, even before colonial America. And so he was able to write different things other than just a lot of straight westerns. So I don't think he would have had any complaints about Bonanza or The Big Valley or Gunsmoke, other than to say all of those things together and all of the other western TV series, many of which he wrote for, were maybe a little bit oversaturation of westerns, and it also is probably one of the reasons why there are much fewer westerns around today, is because we just kind of did it a little bit too much and all at one time, and it might have been better to sort of string it out a little longer. Michael says, what was your favorite novel from your father, and what was his opinion on Bendigo Shafter? Well, he thought Bendigo Shafter was a special book of his, and he didn't have that opinion too often. He knew he had done something very special when he wrote The Daybreakers, and he knew he had done something really special when he wrote Bendigo Shafter. And Bendigo Shafter really, if you look at the Lost Treasures postscript of Bendigo Shafter, I go into some of the details of what he was doing there, what he was trying to do there, and thematically what he was playing around with, and how interesting it was. And I would tell you now, but I just don't think I could do as good a job as I did when I laid it out in the postscript. I think I did a better job than I could do now explaining it. So I would have to say, take a look at that. And let's see here. Your dad occasionally referred to a lineage playing a role in a person's mystical properties, second sight, premonition, etc. Are these a reflection of his own experiences? No, but you can't be a writer and not feel connected to the sense of some other world or some other reality. I mean, you definitely get the feeling that you are the medium for what you do rather than its complete creator. As much as you will struggle and go, okay, what happens next? And know that you're making it up. When it starts coming, it feels like it's coming from somewhere else. And so I think a lot of writers have a strange sense of the mystical, because what they do kind of has mystical properties. And Dad wrote a lot from his unconscious. He trained himself very early to write directly from his unconscious rather than plotting things out. And he worked very, very hard. It's the experience that I've had that has been most like this is watching friends of mine that I know study improv comedy, and how you have to be so connected to the audience and how you have to be so free and open to allow whatever it is that crosses your mind to come out. And it's difficult. It's difficult to open those doors to your unconscious, and it's difficult to keep them open. And Dad Dad was always nervous to stop writing. Taking a day off was something that kind of scared him because he knew that the more time you allow those doors to shut, the harder it is to get them open again. And so, so yeah, there is something mystical about writing. Just flat out, that is probably the best answer. Let's see here. Skipping on down, trying to for questions. Craig says, do you think your dad wrote himself into a lot of the books that he wrote? Well, you can never not write. You always end up being a little bit in your work, but I would say no. I would say he didn't put himself into his work very much, except the early work. So No Traveler Returns. There are 3 characters in No Traveler Returns that seem to have a direct relationship to my dad. No Traveler Returns is a Yondering story. So the collection of short stories, Yondering, is very closely associated with the novel No Traveler Returns. In fact, some of the characters in the Yondering short stories show up in No Traveler Returns, or vice versa. And those were definitely drawn more directly on my dad's life. And he was a younger writer at the time, and I think younger writers, as I was discussing earlier based on another question, I think that younger writers tend to base their characters on real people, as opposed to kind of making them up and making up characters that fit the needs of the story or fit the needs of what the writer is trying to say. And so yeah, he's in those earlier ones. And then there are pieces of his experience that that show up in different stories. I think I've forgotten the story. I think it was Hanging Woman Creek. Begins with 2 characters kind of riding the rails across the upper Midwest, if I'm right. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, they're hobos, and that was definitely a bunch of material that was from Dad's life, but it wasn't those characters. It was just those characters in that situation, or it was that particular situation. There are a few moments in Haunted Mesa that relate to Dad's experience, and but again, not really the characters. It just depends. I think as you mature as a writer, you start just writing this character that the story needs rather than thinking about who would be a good character. Let's see. Did your dad have any special methods for overcoming? So this is Nitro. Says this. He says, did your dad have any special methods for overcoming writer's block or the sense of having trouble figuring out what comes next? Yes, he created this manner of writing from his unconscious. So he started out writing like almost every other writer does, and he outlined and he carefully figured out what the story was going to be about. And once he got it written, he would rewrite it until he got it the way he wanted. And it was very laborious, and he wasn't making any money because he was taking too long to do things. And he started training himself more and more to just kind of open up and spew the story onto the page. And I think he failed a lot. I think he wrote a lot of stuff that didn't turn into a story, but he finally got himself, after hundreds of tries, he finally got himself to the point where he was doing it. And so the writer's block, in my opinion, is more it's not so much a crisis of creativity, not knowing what happens next. It's a crisis of confidence. It's a crisis of saying, it's not so much that I don't know what happens next, it's that I don't know if it's good enough, or I don't know if it's the right thing. And he simply started writing whatever his unconscious told him to write. And it started working. And then having faith in that got him past a lot of writer's block. The only place I ever saw him deal with anything that was like writer's block at all was Haunted Mesa. And he got into that, and he got in a little bit over his head. A lot of it was because he had a lot of goals that he had made up for that particular story, and they were kind of unreasonable. They were very intellectual. He had a lot of things that he wanted to do with it. Normally he didn't have a lot of goals for his story. It was just what the goals were for his story were the things that when he sat down at the typewriter came out. And but he had set himself a lot of things that he wanted to do in that story, and he realized they weren't coming out. Those weren't the things that were coming out when he sat down to write, and he wanted them to be. And we actually talked about it quite a bit. And, he would say, I'm not really sure what to do. And I read the first 70 pages of it or so, and I just went, Dad, you just got to relax. This is A Princess of Mars, which is an Edgar Rice Burroughs story. It is a fantasy adventure. This is the thing you're good at. Stop trying to make all these other things happen and get all these other things into it, and just let it go. And he eventually did, but he was never entirely comfortable with it. And it was because I think he set too lofty a set of goals that would have worked for other writers, but it wasn't good for the way that he worked. Did he ever meet Stephen King? I don't think he did, but they kind of knew each other through corresponding and stuff. I mean, Stephen, I think they were supposed to meet at one point, and King couldn't make it, and he left some wonderful autographed first editions for my dad. And then, of course, Stephen King would mention Dad in some of his books sometimes. And my father always he didn't read much of Stephen King's, but he had a very good feeling about him, and knew that he was a kindred spirit, because he was a ferocious creative talent, another ferocious creative talent. So I think the two understood one another very well. Matthew said, how did your dad experience that prior to World War II? He did not experience combat prior to World War II, as far as I can tell. He occasionally made some comments about being in China in the 30s, and I'm not 100% sure that that's something that he really did. He was definitely in China for a few days in the 1920s, not long enough to see any combat there. He was with the crew of a merchant ship that stopped in Shanghai, and he was definitely in he was definitely in a lot of waterfront brawls and street corner brawls and things like that. But I do not believe he experienced combat in World War II. And when he was when he was actually in Europe in the fighting in World War II, he was in the Transportation Corps. And so there were a few times when they were under fire, and a few times when they had to do some very some kind of nasty things. They actually had to drive their gasoline tankers, each with something like, I think they were a double rig, 2,000-gallon high-octane gasoline tankers per truck. And so a whole platoon of these, I'm not entirely sure how many trucks that was, but they had to drive those trucks through a French town that had been firebombed. It was in flames. And at a certain point in the road, they had to make a 90-degree turn. So they almost had to stop the trucks at that point and edge them around this turn. And if I remember correctly, stopped outside of town, and the townspeople helped them gather up mattresses and blankets and all kinds of stuff, which they wet down, and they covered the trucks with all of this soaking material to try and get them through, and they got through without much trouble. There was also a time in Germany, as they closed in Germany, where there were some snipers that Dad had to hunt down so that his trucks could get through, and I think that was a moment that affected him rather deeply. I mean, he basically had to go into the woods and hunt these guys like he was hunting animals. I don't think it was a firefight, and so he had a tough experience a couple of times, but he wasn't in a combat unit. So going on down here, let's see. Have you ever read the Arizona Saga by J.P.S. Brown? I have not. Let's see if there's anything else here. What writer in today's market do you think most closely writes like your dad? I don't know. I once read, the strangest thing, I once read a science fiction book called Under the City of Angels. And I think the guy's last name was Brown. I can't remember the rest of his name. Jerry Brown, or Jerry Earl Brown, or something like that. And it was nothing like my dad would have written. And but the strangest thing was, as I was reading it, and my dad was still alive at the time when I read it, as I was reading it, I said, this man, for some weird reason, I'll have to go back and read it and see what I think about it now. This man could, like, take over a Louis L'Amour story and just write a Louis L'Amour story, because there's something about this that was very much like the way Dad wrote. Can't remember what it was. I just remember thinking that at the time, 35 years ago or something of the sort. Let's see. George Cooper III says, was Louis L'Amour a Christian or a believer in a higher power? I've wondered all these years. I love his books. My father raised me. Okay, so Dad was raised a Methodist. He was never a particularly strict Christian or anything of the sort. We were not, our household wasn't a religious Christian household. Dad definitely believed in a higher power. So I would say that, we were definitely not atheists, and he's definitely not an atheist. But I don't think that he felt that any particular religion had it exactly nailed, that they were all attempts at a universal truth about creation and about the relationship between people and something like a deity that was relatively accurate, and that maybe most religions had something valuable to say about that. So no, he wasn't a Christian, but he was raised in a Christian household, and he had a lot of respect for Christianity, and obviously the Christian kind of canon of stories and things of that sort. Sandy asks, what do you have of your father's that you value the most? And I would say, well, his notes and things like that, the stories that I've been working on. I know that I'm guessing the question is more like sort of an item or something, but I would say that no, the real thing are the things that connect me with his personality, and that's more intellectual information than anything else. Let's see here. Your father had, so Matthew says, your father had definite ideas about space being the last frontier of adventure writing. What held him back from writing about space himself? Um, I don't know. I think maybe he felt he hadn't quite gotten there yet. I think he felt, his books were always very grounded in a real landscape and reality and a little bit of history and things like that. And I think that he may have felt a little intimidated that he didn't know enough about, how to start writing what was essentially science fiction. I think he would have liked to. Late in his life, strangely, I was the person that introduced him to Thomas Paine, who had one time been the head of NASA. And Tom was a great guy that a friend of mine worked for. And the two of them and Chuck Yeager and some other very interesting people were all on the President's Commission on Space. This was in the Reagan era. And I think he was having a great time, talking and catching up and learning things from Tom and Chuck and some of the other people that were involved. And so, I think if he'd been 20 or 30 years younger and had 20 or 30 years more writing in him, he definitely would have tried a traditional science fiction story, unlike Haunted Mesa or something of the sort. Let's see here. um, so Deanne is asking about lava flows and the detail about a number of Louis' stories having to do with lava flows and utilizing that landscape. The details have me wondering if his research led him to that era or was it strictly from others' experience. Well, we spent a lot of time, especially around the two Malpais areas in New Mexico, so the western Malpais that's just east of Grants, and then the one that sort of parallels Llanada del Muerte as you go down into southern New Mexico. And so, we spent some time around that. I think he was just always fascinated by it because it was such a rugged landscape and it was so strange and things of that sort. And he'd definitely been up through the lava country in Idaho and things like that too. So I think he was just fascinated by it because it was such a challenging, interesting landscape. Let's see what else is here. Did your dad spend any time in Texas, and if so, what did he think of it? I don't know what he thought of it. Dad's first trip to sea was from Galveston, and so he spent some time in southern Texas and around Katy, and then his family traveled through Lubbock and Weatherford and Canning and Marfa and some of those places on their kind of epic journey out of Jamestown, North Dakota. So in the early 20s, they had an opportunity to sell their property in Jamestown and settle some debts, and they set off with almost everything they had tied to the car and attempted to find a new life for themselves, which didn't work out very well for quite a few years. And they traveled south through Nebraska and Oklahoma and into Texas and attempted to work in Texas in a number of places, and they ended up in New Mexico for a while, and then Arizona for quite a bit longer. But Dad spent a good deal of time in Texas in his teens and 20s, and then of course he was back on many occasions once he became a well-known Western writer. So, everybody loves Texas. I mean, Texas is such a distinctive place, and the people are such distinctive people, and it's I think it's just it's a state full of wonderful, fascinating attitude. I think. Chad says, "What are your thoughts on the movie The Quick and the Dead with Sam Elliott, one of my favorite westerns?" I liked Sam Elliott, and I liked The Quick and the Dead, and I liked the fact that it was one of the, Kate Capshaw didn't make an awful lot of movies, but I liked her also, and so I enjoyed it quite a bit. Um, Michael says, "Your father wrote with a great appreciation of American people. What was his experience in life?" Terrific. And I mean, from the time he was a child, and Native Americans who had fought either alongside his grandfather or against his grandfather used to come to Jamestown, North Dakota to visit his grandfather, or just to visit, and ran into his grandfather. Um, I think he always had a great appreciation for Native Americans, and you also have to realize that people growing up in that time period, um, you know, we who end up growing up in cities and things like that are sort of separated from the the places where you kind of interact with Native Americans to a great extent. And my dad didn't live in a world that was like that. He lived in a world where an awful lot of the people he ran onto um, were Native Americans, and understood them very well. I mean, it's a strange thing because I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up going to public schools in LA, which sometimes, which weren't necessarily the greatest schools in the whole world, but they were considerably better than they are now. And some of the people that I knew and got along with, I won't say we were ever lifelong friends or anything like that, were displaced Navajos in Los Angeles. I think I was one of the few people in those schools that understood um, who they were, and so it's it's an interesting thing. I mean, I can remember, every once in a while I'd pass these guys in the hall, and I'd say, "Yeah, hey," and which is, now I can't pronounce it very well, which is kind of a greeting in Navajo, and they were always kind of surprised, and and so I think that he just lived a life that wasn't particularly separate from American Native peoples, and luckily that was the same thing with my sister and I, even though we grew up in places where I think a lot of people, rarely saw or rarely could identify an American Indian, um, if they saw one on the street. So, okay, let's see. Leo says, "Was he a deer hunter?" Later in life, I mean, after the time that he was my father, so from his, I don't know, even before that, I'm not sure that Dad did any hunting after World War II. Some of that was because he just didn't have the money to do anything like that. He lived in Los Angeles. All he did was write. He basically could afford a couple of changes of clothes and an apartment, and the idea of having the time and the money for a decent firearm and the money for a car or something to get himself into the wilderness and go hunting, those things weren't available. And so he just didn't have that kind of, I know it seems silly to call that wealth, because it isn't, but he didn't have that kind of wealth. And then by the time he did, he was just working so hard that he wasn't particularly interested in that. And I know all kinds of people that hunt, and I support it, and I think it's terrific in a lot of ways. I don't do it, but I don't have any negative opinions towards it. But it just is something that if you live in the city, it's just, it's a difficult thing to get yourself together to do, and you got to really want to do it. Lynette says, "Did your father experience a lot of the West for his writing of places and ideas?" Yeah, he tried to get out whenever he could. Obviously, as I was just talking about, in his earlier career, he was not able to do that as much as he wanted. Dad didn't drive, and so he never had a driver's license. He owned a car for a brief period in the 1920s, and I mean a couple of months. And then probably the next time he was around a car that was his, it was after he had married my mom, and she could drive, and then I could drive. And that's how he got out and got around. Not having a driver's license also kept him trapped at home behind the typewriter, which was really where he wanted to be, and it was where he was able to earn a living. So it wasn't all negative. Chad says, what are your favorite Western TV shows, movies that have been made in more recent years? I am a big fan of Unforgiven. This was a terrific film, especially if you could see it in a movie theater with an audience. It's nowhere near as effective on, home video or something like that. But if you see it with 300 people, it is a fascinating movie. I like a lot of the classics. I'm a big fan of Rio Bravo. I'm a big fan of She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. I'm a big fan of The Searchers, and a lot of those movies. I love the spaghetti westerns. My dad loved the spaghetti westerns too. Especially the Clint Eastwood Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. We thought those were great. I mean, he didn't take them very seriously, but he thought it was a lot of fun. Kind of a visual opera, which is super. Dad really liked, and I completely agree with him, Jeremiah Johnson. He thought Jeremiah Johnson was just about the best Western movie ever made. And I particularly like it also because it's not about the kind of classic Western era. I also really liked the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. This is a terrific movie, although it's kind of a Western, but it's also very much about living in Hollywood. It's also very much about hero worship and stalking and how those things can get very strange, and star power and things like that. So it's a terrific melding of worlds, kind of our world and the world of the legendary West. Did he ever meet Audie Murphy? Or what may he have thought of him? He did not meet Audie Murphy. I think that he was incredibly impressed with Audie Murphy's exploits during the war. I think he might have been very cautious about the post-war Audie Murphy, who is maybe a little suicidal. I mean, he was definitely working out some demons. I'm just saying that because I know things about Audie Murphy. Dad never talked about that aspect of his life, but I'm thinking that. Timothy is saying, I just moved to Bullhead City, just found out that Louis worked at the Catherine Mine. Yep, he worked at the Catherine Mine for quite a while. And let's see what else. Craig, good to see you. I'm glad you're here. More questions. So just give me a second. I'm scanning down. Michael says, I love the maps in your dad's books. Was that his idea? No, I think that was the people who put together the Leatherette collection wanted to put something kind of fancy in those books that gave them a little extra value, and I think it was a terrific thing. And those guys, it was a pair of brothers that did the maps and laid the maps out and everything, did a terrific job. And of course now we've got them in the paperbacks, and we've also got copies of those maps on our website. If you ever want to look at them, you can go there and see them. And Larry Zarkoff, good to see you. I'm not sure we're going to be here too much longer because this is the longest Facebook Live we have ever done, but I'm guessing people are, home and bored, and so many of us are locked down, and so this is good. It's definitely keeping me out of trouble. But if I don't get another question, I may. Oh, there we are. Another question. How much time, if any, did your dad spend in Alaska? Margie Wright is asking this. As far as I know, none. I think of the whole family, I'm the only one that's been to Alaska. But, as is typical of my dad, he spent a lot of time studying maps, and he was very good at being able to extrapolate a map into what a countryside actually looked like. And this was because he had spent a lot of time comparing maps to the exact countryside that they referred to. And he also, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but in the early days of World War II, Dad was in the tank destroyers. And so in tank destroyer school, they spent a certain amount of time studying artillery and things like this, and the way that an artilleryman would interact with the countryside. And that means being able to shoot over things and position gun emplacements behind things and things like this. So he had not necessarily the level of knowledge that, say, a surveyor or something like that would, but he had a level of knowledge of countryside that was technical, and he was well trained. And then let's see what else is there. Ron Miller says, so if he did not drive, did he hire a driver when he did location research? Well, no. He would convince a friend to drive him, or he would convince a girlfriend to drive him, and then eventually he didn't have to convince my mother to drive him, and he rarely had to convince me to drive him. So I always looked forward to going out in the desert with him and driving him around. And my mom enjoyed that. And you also have to recognize that although my mom spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, her father developed a lot of property in the San Bernardino Mountains. So he developed a big section of Big Bear, which is a recreation area up in the mountains near Los Angeles. And he also developed a lot of property down in the Palm Springs area. And so she was always going off into these, kind of rural areas of Southern California and spending a lot of time there. And certainly, like if you were to think of all of the locations that you would see in like the Lonesome Gods, those were places that my dad experienced with my mother. And those were places that were close to her and close to her heart and close to her, where her family lived and things like that. And so the desert, the desert areas and things like that were definitely a lot of places that were, with my mom. Looking for some more here. Let's see. Michael asks, did he have any bias towards a specific Sackett or branch of the Sackett family? Well, of course, he wrote most of his stories about the, Tell, Orrin, Tyrell trio of brothers, and so maybe so. I mean, I think that he was very comfortable writing the Tell and Tyrell as first-person characters, but when you're a writer, you love all your characters. You could write the most horrible person in the world. You could write the most demonic villain. And if you're the writer who created that person, you love them. I mean, it's like when they start talking and they're saying things that are interesting, or they're doing things that are interesting, they could be your favorite. They could be your favorite character. I mean, you get attached to every one of your creations. So I'm not sure that there was really a special group that he was most attached to. The characters that you tend to like as a writer are the ones that are the easiest to write. They're the ones that have the clearest goals, and they're the ones that have the clearest way of approaching a problem, and I mean clearest to you, the writer. And so, I think the characters that you love are the characters that are easy to write, the characters that when you sit down and you start typing, their voice comes out. And I think that there's definitely a true thing there that tells voice definitely came easily to my father, and so I would say that he was very partial to that character. Will said, would speak about the Chantry saga, those depicted Borden Chantry's son. Do you think he was writing about you and his legacy? No, not really, but it is, he actually wrote about Tom Chantry, Borden Chantry's son, in North to the Rails before he ever wrote about Borden Chantry. Which is kind of interesting, and I love North to the Rails. North to the Rails would make the greatest movie. I keep hoping that someday we'll have the opportunity to do that. Chad asked, did your dad ever spend time in Canada? Yes, absolutely. We traveled all over Canada. He spent a great deal of time in eastern Canada, along the Gulf of St. Lawrence and out in the Gaspé area. And we also spent a good deal of time around, Quebec City and Toronto, and then Calgary and Vancouver. So my dad's family was from Canada, and so he had connections there. His family was a little bit mysterious. His Canadian family was a little bit mysterious, and so, I mean, they were back and forth across the border, United States, Canada, back and forth. I don't know that you necessarily say they were Canadians always, but there were some of them that were Canadians. And so he was very connected. He had Canadian roots, so to speak. Sandy asks, how did your mom and dad meet? Okay, so now we'll have some fun. My father, I'm not sure how he met an actress named Julie Newmar. Okay, so Julie Newmar was one of the actresses that played Catwoman on the Batman television show. She was also an incredibly talented dancer and choreographer. I mean, to the point where she was considered to be a talented dancer and choreographer when she was in her late teens, I think. She was working for the studios. She actually danced in a movie of Dad's, East of Sumatra, although I don't think he met her at that time. He met her just months afterwards, but I don't think he met her because of that. And they dated for a while, and she was in an acting class with my mother. And my dad and Julie and my mother and her family all spent some time down in the desert at my mom's family's place in the Coachella Valley, or in the La Quinta area. And then my dad and Julie got engaged, and Julie went to the East Coast to work in theater, and my dad was back and forth between the East Coast and the West Coast, and eventually I think Julie recognized that her career was taking off and that she wasn't necessarily ready to become a wife to anybody, and at that moment, and she and my dad broke up. And my dad came back to Los Angeles, and he was walking down Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, right in front of Schwab's, the legendary Schwab's drugstore. And he saw my mother drive by, and he called out to her, and she stopped, and they started talking, and I guess he asked her out on a date or asked her for her phone number or something. And then they were an item, and in not too terribly many months or years later, they were married. So that's how they met, and they were a great married couple. They were really incredibly supportive of one another, and they were really terrific parents. Next question down here: did he hike. Yes, Dad wasn't the kind of person who necessarily wanted to camp out or carry that much material around, and I kind of inherited that from him. My attitude when it comes to hiking and things like that is I would rather be a little bit uncomfortable than have to carry too much stuff. So I'd rather deal with not maybe enough food, and I'd rather hike really hard and get back before dark, or spend the night with a minimum of equipment and then get back. So he didn't really make a big production of hiking or camping, but as long as he was physically fit enough to do it. I mean, you also have to recognize the prime years of my dad's career were between age 70 and 80. Okay, and so he died in 1988 at 80, and so it was only kind of earlier in my childhood that we did a lot of that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean he wasn't walking all over Southwest Colorado and Utah and places like that when I was in my mid 20s, and he could walk us to death. I mean, he was very fit. Let's see here. See if did your dad do any interviews that we could watch? I think Paul's got some, and he might be able to arrange a link for that. But there's some stuff on YouTube that you could take a look at. And some people are signing off, so I'm probably going to sign off pretty soon. See if there's any more. Been to Nova Scotia, not exactly, but we've been very close. So if there's any more story. Margie writes, says, no, engaged. She's talking about to Julie Newmar. Oh, wow, this has made my day. My dad was engaged a lot. He was also engaged to an actress named Kati Hirado. And as nice a woman as Julie is, and I never met Kati, but I'm sure she was very nice. I'm very glad he married my mother. All right, let's see here. Nancy says, I've heard he got the name Sackets from an old well. Could you tell that story? I don't really know that story. Somewhere west of Yuma, Arizona, there is a well in the desert called Sackett's Well. It's named for Lieutenant, I believe, Delos Sackett, who later went on to be a relatively highly placed official in the American government. And Dad said that he got the name from that particular place. I'm not sure that he was ever even there. He may have just seen it on the map. Dad was always studying maps. And let's see. All right, so people are kind of signing off, and I'm going to sign off too because my voice is going, and we've been here almost 2 hours. And I just want to thank you guys, and I want to say stay really safe. I know people that have coronavirus. It's nothing to mess around with, and I think if we all just pray for each other and stay safe and hope we all come out of this soon, that would be terrific. And of course, if it goes on too much longer, I will do another one of these, and we'll try and entertain one another on another evening. So have a good night, and a couple more comments. I'm just going to check because I like to get to everybody. Will asked, did your dad read Tolkien or Lewis? Did he like them? He did not read either one, as far as I know. That was me. I was the one in the family that read that kind of stuff. And so, okay, anymore. Nope, we're going. So I'm going to sign off. Take care. Have a really great evening. Stay safe, everybody, and sayonara.